For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nick Mathutis, and I serve as press secretary in the Office of the President. This morning, I'll also be serving as your moderator for today's OUP Innovation Spotlight. But before we jump in, I want to do a little bit of framing about what we're going to be doing today. So this is the third installment in what we're calling, as I said, the OUP Innovation Spotlight. Big thanks go to our Chief of Staff, Lynette Haynes-Turner, and our Policy and Practice team for putting the foundation of this Spotlight series together. As a reminder, and for those of you who weren't able to join the last cabinet meetings, a little explainer for what we're about to do. So these spotlights aim to educate, inform, and hopefully inspire you all as we learn about a specific topic, program, or initiative that's happening in an office under the president. We're doing this because under the bold leadership of President Preckwinkle, and given the recent infusion of federal funding that we all know about, these catalysts have developed, or these catalysts have spurred the development of dozens of innovative and transformative initiatives in offices under the president. Excuse me. And while there are a number of external engagement activities, outreach materials, press conferences that we all use to get the message out about these innovative programs and initiatives, we've heard from you all that there's a desire for more consistent opportunities to share our good work with one another that goes beyond our individual offices. So with that in mind, the Spotlight Series and panel offers an opportunity for Cook County policy leads, external policy experts, frontline project staff to, number one, to create space to share the good and impactful work that we're doing in OUP, to showcase and uplift the staff members who are directly implementing these programs, and finally, to make connections for OUP cabinet members, that is you all, across problems, data, and solutions. So we all know our work is interconnected, and we hope that these panels illuminate those connections. Okay, so with that frame in mind, allow me to briefly introduce the Spotlight Initiative topic for today, as the President just did. So what we're talking about today is Cook County Legal Aid for Housing and Debt, or CLAAHD. CLAAHD is a program housed under the Bureau of Economic Development aimed at helping Cook County residents deal with issues around evictions, foreclosures, and consumer debt through legal aid, case management, and connections to resources. Our panelists today are Dina Al-Khatib, Project Director for Bureau of Economic Development, Karina Segalini, Court Administrator and Program Manager for the Office of the Chief Judge, Bob Glaves, Executive Director of the Chicago Bar Foundation, and Danerika Brooks, Director of Housing Practice Group for Legal Aid Chicago. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being here and for taking the time out of your busy days to share your expertise. We're going to start with some canned questions from me, and then we'll move to the audience for some questions. Let's get started. You guys ready? All right. So Dina, can you start us off by giving us a brief overview and a bit more detail around Cook County Legal Aid for Housing and Debt?
Sure, thanks, Nick. So Cook County Legal Aid for Housing and Debt, or CLAAHD as we like to call it, provides no-cost legal assistance that helps both Chicago and suburban Cook County residents resolve their housing and debt issues. There are two components to the program. The first is the early resolution program, and that focuses on evictions and consumer debt issues. And it serves renters facing eviction, small landlords seeking to evict tenants, residents being sued for unpaid debt, and then in some cases, even residents who need to sue someone who owes them money. And then the other arm of the program is the mortgage foreclosure mediation program, and that serves homeowners that are behind on their mortgage or property taxes and at risk of losing their homes. As you can see from our panel today, CLAAHD is a collaboration among multiple public and private partners. And with that, there's actually a couple different ways that people can access the services. The primary access point is via hotline. People call in, their needs are assessed, and then if they qualify, they're referred to an attorney for an initial consultation. Otherwise, they are connected to or referred to other resources. And then residents who've received a court summons or for eviction or foreclosure may be referred into the program directly through the courts. And in addition to providing the legal consultations, the program also connects clients to rental or mortgage payment assistance when and where it's available. Just for a little historical context, as the president mentioned, the mortgage foreclosure mediation program was actually implemented during the Great Recession, but it was sunset in 2017. CLAAHD began in 2020 as an early response to COVID-19, and it started with the eviction and consumer debt component. And then the mortgage foreclosure mediation program was re-stood up under the CLAAHD umbrella. And to date, over 57,000 people have been served by CLAAHD under both program models.
Thanks, Tina. Thanks, Tina. Karina, let's jump to you and your office, which represents another side of how Cook County is involved in CLAAHD. Karina, can you tell us about the role of the court system?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. That's a good question. So the court system is actually a really crucial component to any of these legal aid programs that are coordinated with outside stakeholders, in particular CLAAHD, right? Because it's a place where litigants often are, it's the place where litigants often first learn about services that are available to them at no cost. A lot of times, in many cases, the initiation of a lawsuit, like an eviction case or a foreclosure case, that's the first time defendants often realize that there's a true problem with their housing or their debt situation. And when they come to court, that's the first time that they actually learn about programs like CLAAHD, ERP, MFMP, and that's where the judge can direct them to those resources. We have outside resources, in-court resources, and particularly with evictions, they're able to get help directly in that court proceeding. They connect right then and there with a legal aid attorney where they can start talking about their issues. And it's also crucial that the court is involved in this process because that's where the judge can actually allow extra time for the litigants to access all of these resources and potentially get to a resolution that would result in dismissal of the case. And so then the judges can also review any settlement cases, settlement agreements to make sure it's fair for both sides, and then ultimately dismiss the case, resulting in saving of a home or rehoming in a way that doesn't require them to be homeless before that. So, yeah.
Thanks, Karina. All right, Bob, let's move to you. We couldn't do this work without partners, of course. What is the role of the Chicago Bar Foundation?
Thanks, Nick. Okay. I saw Karina a minute ago. All right, this is working. All right. The CBF is managing the overall program in partnership with the county and the circuit court. As you might gather from listening to the overview of the program from Dina and Karina, there are a number of legal aid, case management, and community outreach partners in the program, dozens altogether. And Denerica and Legal Aid Chicago, her organization, are one of the core groups, and you're going to hear more from Denerica about their work. There also are other important stakeholders who are involved in it, including landlord and creditor groups. We have rental assistance agencies, including the counties, but also the city and state who are part of this, and then other city and county agencies who've been part of it. So it's quite a universe of folks who are coming together around this. We work closely with the county and the court and all these partners I just referenced to develop the original program model. And then we continuously evaluate the program as we're going, adapt as we're learning more, and are constantly trying to improve the program based on the actual experience as we go. The CBF is donating all of our time involved with this so that other than some modest ARPA compliance expenses, all the money goes directly to these partner organizations who are doing the work on the front lines. We're also working with the consulting firm Stout on a formal evaluation of the program. That was funded separately by the Pew Charitable Trust. I'll talk a little bit about some of their work a little bit later. And then the other significant role we play is we work closely with county representatives, including Dina and Nick, on communications around the program and compliance with the various federal grant requirements. So there's a lot of moving parts for a program of this size and scale, but thanks to the county, the circuit court, and all the partners involved, it's really become a model public-private partnership, and it's been nationally recognized by the White House and others as an innovative response to the eviction crisis.
Certainly worth applauding. Let's talk a little bit more about the work going on the ground. Denerica, what is the role of legal aid groups like Legal Aid Chicago, and what is your role specifically?
So the role of legal aid is to provide direct services. That's what we do. We're connecting with the litigants in court. We are really letting them know what to expect. So for many people that come into the program, when they come in and they're served with an eviction summons, it's the first time that they've come to court. So they don't know what to expect. They don't know what their rights are. They're afraid, and so they don't necessarily come to court. For the first time, we can say, come to court. That's the best thing that you can do. You're going to get connected with an attorney, with mediation services, with other resources. So our role really is to provide access. We're trying to provide access to our judicial system and to take the mystery and some of the fear out of engaging with the court system. So when someone comes in, as Legal Aid Chicago, we're the largest provider of free civil legal services in Cook County. So when someone comes into the ERP program, we're able to meet with them, we assess their cases, we let them know what their options are, what their rights are, and then really talk through what they can do. Because the other thing we want to do is empower individuals and communities. We shouldn't be sitting in a space where we're telling people what they have to do, but rather we can educate you and provide you with information so that you can make an informed decision about what works for yourself. So giving that autonomy to act and engage in a way that is in your own best interest. We don't always agree with tenants and what they want to do, or landlords and what they want to do, and they don't always agree with us. And that's okay. But the point is they know what their options are and they can decide what steps they want to take next. On a more practical level, our job is to try to get the parties to actually communicate, to try to take the principle of the matter out of it and to resolve their legal issues and resolve their differences so that everyone gets a little bit of something. Everyone can walk away with something that they are agreeable with, if we can get to that point, and it's not always that we can. But to also prevent homelessness, to get money into the hands of the landlords, and to really make sure that both parties have a say in what happens to them.
Thank you, Danica. All right, let's pivot a little bit and talk about data. Karina, can you talk about some of the eviction and foreclosure trends at the beginning of the pandemic versus where we are right now? And also, are there any lessons that have been learned from past crises, the mortgage foreclosure crisis that informed CLAAHD to begin with?
Sure. As you heard from Danica, coming to court is a really crucial component of this. And to give you a little bit of perspective, overall, new eviction filings have rebounded back to pre-pandemic levels, but they have not surpassed it. Pre-pandemic, new eviction filings averaged between 29,000 and 32,000 eviction filings annually. During the pandemic, we saw about 9,000 to 11,000 new eviction filings during those years, even with the eviction moratorium in place. Those were residential cases that had health and safety hazards that were able to go forward outside of the moratorium, and commercial cases. Now we're back to pre-pandemic levels, but again, we have not surpassed them. We're averaging around 29,000 new eviction cases per year at this point. The bulk of those are filed in Chicago, and about 95% of those are residential evictions as well. Foreclosures, on the other hand, have not rebounded. We were, just like with evictions, we were expecting like a tsunami of eviction filings, which didn't occur. We were also expecting a large spike in foreclosures as well. Much to everyone's surprise, we have not received any rebound in foreclosures, which I think we would all agree is a good problem to have. So at the height of the Great Recession back in like 2012, we at the Circuit Court of Cook County peaked at our highest level of foreclosures in September of 2012 when we had 82,000 foreclosures pending. And we were receiving, at that time, we were receiving over 40,000 new foreclosure filings each year. So that contributed to a huge backlog. We were overrun at that point. Prior to that, that an average year would have been around 15,000 to 16,000 new foreclosure cases annually. By the time 2019 came around, we had already hit a historical low for our foreclosure filings and barely reaching 11,000 new cases. As we all know, in 2020, the pandemic hit, there was a foreclosure moratorium that didn't allow, basically ground foreclosures to a halt. There were a few exceptions to that. And then, so during the pandemic, we had as few as 2,600 new cases filed annually. And then once those moratoria were lifted, we expected a large spike in foreclosures, but that hasn't happened. Right now, we're still seeing only about 9,000 new foreclosures. That's what we had in 2021, and we're on track to have even less this year. So if we hit 9,000, that would be keeping us stable, but right now the monthly filings are indicating that we're gonna end up in 2023 a little bit less than 9,000 at this point. So even though we didn't see these like severe spikes in filings or like the tsunami that everyone was thinking about when we were developing the ERP, we did pull lessons from the foreclosure mediation program back in its first iteration. And one of those things that we really pulled from was adjusting the actual court process. So particularly with evictions, we were able to add in another status date that extended the time it would take for a plaintiff to actually get to trial in an eviction case. Those moved much quicker than a statutory foreclosure. Before the pandemic, evictions could go to trial in as little as a week. Now it's taking closer to a month to get to that point because there are those status dates to allow litigants to access those resources. So this adjustment to the procedure is a fair modification. It doesn't overly delay the eviction for landlords, but it also allows defendants time to access resources so that they feel like they had a fair access to the justice system and that they were able to be heard in court as well. We also know that after the MFMP and after a few years of the ERP, that being prepared to pivot at any point with these programs is crucial because filings and the landscape of these areas of law can change, and we need to be able to adapt to those changes and the needs of the court and the needs of the litigants as well.
Thanks, Karina. All right, so we've talked about data. Let's go back to the feelings a little bit and talk about the why. So Dina, why is this program important to the county? Why are we doing this work?
Good question, Nick. There are a number of reasons why CLAAHD is important to the county. First is the need. So initially CLAAHD was stood up to address the heightened susceptibility to eviction and foreclosure and debt that accompanied employment and income loss during COVID. As Karina just mentioned, at the height of the pandemic, eviction and foreclosure filings dropped to historic lows, in large part because of the moratoriums, but those moratoriums have been lifted. And at the same time, we know that inflation is driving up rents, food costs, and other household expenses. So with eviction filings being up to pre-pandemic levels, the need for CLAAHD is still there. And then traditionally, the city of Chicago has had more resources for these types of programs. The ARPA funding has really allowed us to expand resources, especially rental assistance, into suburban Cook County. Another reason why CLAAHD is important is equity, and we are in Equity Week right now. Over 2/3 of those served by the program are African American and 15% are Latinx. Also, a majority of the households served earned less than $25,000 annually, in spite of a fairly large percentage of households reporting being employed full-time. So CLAAHD is really helping to address the economic and racial inequities in our region. And then I would argue that finally and most importantly, it's about protecting financial resiliency. Foreclosure and eviction and unpaid debt have long-term negative consequences on a household's financial security. It prevents you from getting future credit. It can prevent you from entering into future leases. And of course, in the worst case scenarios, families can end up homeless. And it's much more cost effective and also much more humane to prevent or mitigate an eviction or foreclosure than it is to rehouse a family that has been pushed into homelessness.
And Bob, let's go back to you. What impact is CLAAHD having, and how does the model in Cook County compare to other legal assistance models around the country? I know you talked about how we were lauded by the White House. Should talk more about that.
Yeah. Well, what really makes CLAAHD unique is that and you've heard a little bit about this from Karina and Dina just now, is we've really reimagined collectively the court process for evictions and consumer debt cases and foreclosures again, to try to achieve three interrelated goals. We want to create a fairer and better court process for all the parties. We want to level the playing field for tenants and debtors in particular. But in the end, we want to avoid preventable evictions and consumer debt judgments whenever that's possible. And these all work together, these goals. So many other jurisdictions have expanded legal aid or rental assistance as part of their pandemic response for evictions. But CLAAHD's unique in that we built all these resources into a comprehensive and redesigned court system where the court is an active partner. And that was part of what the White House was really reacting to, is this is a real innovation that we would hope will be modeled in other places in this way, but really hasn't in this kind of comprehensive fashion. So it really makes it unique. Other unique aspects that we have here are that the process and the program resources are all available remotely via Zoom wherever you are in the county. So prior to this, suburban Cook County residents in particular had a heck of a hard time to find resources even when they were available, and it was harder for lawyers like Denerica to get out there to help people and cover that amount of geographic territory. Now everybody through Zoom is able to access these resources in the same way. And it's really an unprecedented level of assistance we've been able to have for the suburbs. It's also unique that we provide the same resources for small unrepresented landlords as we do for tenants. That really is maybe unique in the whole country right now. And then it's a work in progress, as I said earlier, but it's really showing real results. You heard the global number, but every month now, thousands of people are getting legal and case management services through the program for tenants and debtors. And really importantly, to stress what Karina said, people are getting the time and the resources they need to try to reach agreements in a court process that for eviction and consumer debt really could be over in a week before. And even if you could find help in that amount of time, connecting to those folks and them being able to meaningfully help you was really complicated prior to that. So this gives people some time to try to reach agreements. Obviously, everybody's goal is to try to keep people housed where they are whenever we can. But for many reasons, that's not always going to be a realistic goal. So that's really why one of our overall goals is to avoid preventable evictions. So if someone does have to move, let's try to help them reach agreements that give them the time and resources to be able to move stably, find new housing, and for the landlord, get their unit back on the market, which is going to be a key for keeping affordable housing out there. No one wins when a case has to go all the way to eviction or a judgment in a consumer debt case, so the program is just geared to trying to avoid that whenever we can. So I mentioned the CLAAHD evaluation earlier, and I'll just finish with one anecdote from their evaluation. It's something we monitor closely. They ask everybody who gets help from legal aid during the program, do you feel like you're going to be able to achieve your goals with the assistance you got in the program? And more than 70% consistently have been reporting that yes, they do feel like they are going to be able, they either have or they're going to be able to reach their goals based on the resources. And when you consider the issues involved, that's a really impressive stat that really shows the program's making a difference. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Now let's continue talking about impact, and this will be my last question before we open it up. Denerica, what impact have you seen on the clients that you serve through the program? Are there any stories to relay?
So in a number of cases, we've been able to negotiate reasonable repayment plans in the eviction context between the landlords and the tenants. And that is for those tenants that either have money to pay and just need a payment plan, or those that don't have it, but that we've allowed or been able to help access rental assistance. And the goal behind doing that is allowing us to preserve the housing for the tenants and their families, but also to get money into the hands of these small landlords. Because when we get money back into their hands, we protect their investment, we protect our communities, and we hope that we're helping to increase and maintain generational wealth that small landlords are trying to create themselves by this investment. I've identified 3 stories that I think that really exemplify the ways that small things like negotiation or access to negotiation can actually help families and the different challenges that we see coming into the program. So in one case that we had, the tenant had resided with her children, one of which was a child that had just recently become permanently disabled. The tenant, head of household, got COVID and her hours decreased. She was sick for a while, And just the lingering effects of COVID, she just couldn't go to work, had decreased hours, and eventually lost that employment. She was behind on her rent at that point. And even though she got a job not that long after, she was just never able to catch up. When you are low income and don't have a lot of money, just that one thing is you're always chasing that zero balance. And she just couldn't catch up. So we were able to help that client apply for rental assistance. We were able to negotiate a plan with her landlord where the case was dismissed against her. It was sealed so that she would not have additional barriers to finding housing later. And we even got the landlord to agree to accept rent in accordance with her pay schedule and the new job. And so that's really being able to see one client, what their needs are, and that needing to pay on the 1st and the 15th to meet your rent by the end of the month, that made a huge difference for that individual family. In another case, we had a tenant who was Spanish speaking only, did not know what to expect, never been to court before, didn't understand the process, and was ready to give up on the process just out of fear and lack of information, just willing to walk away. We were able to represent that family. The housing was not sustainable, but being able to identify that. This housing isn't sustainable. This is not, what's the long-term solution that we can come up with? And so in that case, we negotiated a move-out agreement with the landlord, a reasonable time to find something that the tenant could actually afford, but also, okay, if you're gonna be here an extra 30 days, give the landlord that rent for that 30 days without prejudice to them. So they have something coming in. But move out, we got the eviction case dismissed, we got the eviction case sealed, and more importantly, that tenant was able to understand the consequences of their choices. They were able to understand what could happen, what could go wrong, and more importantly, this isn't sustainable. The best thing that I can do is to move so that I don't have an eviction on my record. And so that person was no longer scared or frustrated because the process was explained to them and they understood. And then the last, eviction cases are not all about non-payment of rent. Some of them are about personality conflicts that occur within the buildings in which tenants arise. And principal is everything, and unfortunately, poor folks can't afford principal sometimes. Hate to say it, but it's true. But in one case, the tenant was being evicted because they allegedly threatened someone on the premises, that they threatened a staff person. We got in, we investigated, we did an interview, and we realized that the tenant was the person that had been threatened and actually had a no contact order against the person that accused them of threatening them. And by merely having that information and the tenant having an opportunity to say, look, this is what happened and this is the proof, once we presented that information, the eviction case was voluntarily non-suited, the tenant got to stay, and then there was an agreement reached to stay away from each other. So we avoided homelessness in that case as well. So the cases that involve rent, the cases that don't involve rent, but that really do warrant a conversation. Once we can get a conversation and get the parties at the table, in many cases, we're able to come up with a solution for everyone. So those are just some of the types of cases that we see and the ways that we are using this program just to deal with individuals.
Give a round of applause for that. Thank you. I think the stories really illustrate the impact we're trying to have. Thank you for that. All right, I think we'll go to the audience now for questions.
Yeah, question.
Yeah.
Thank you all first for the great work on the program. Keep it up. And I had a question probably for Karina. You talked about the foreclosure value not returning, and I was just wondering to what extent the mortgage assistance that's been available has contributed to that. Thanks.
Thanks for the question, Dom. I do think mortgage assistance is a factor of the foreclosures not rebounding. However, the Illinois Housing Development Authority is currently sunsetting their mortgage assistance now. It was supposed to sunset in March, and I think that's due to the lower volume of foreclosures that were being filed and the number of people in default. I think another factor for them not rebounding is one, the current mortgages that are in place are not subprime. The underwriting requirements are much stricter now. So you have a lot more stable mortgages that are out there. But then also too, during the pandemic, forbearances were really easy to come by, and lenders were much more open to working out modifications for people in tougher financial situations. So I think a lot of people that were facing financial difficulties were easily able to go into like a 2-year forbearance and might have been able to stabilize their economics within their household. And then have restabilized their mortgages as well. So I think all of those factors come together to help keep those foreclosure filings down right now.
Can I just add to that? It's a good question. I think it is making a real difference for the people. It's definitely one of the factors, and along with rental assistance, where I think there's been a higher volume of it, you see in both cases, the story Danica told, so many of these cases are purely economic, right? And somebody's going through a short-term crisis, and being able to get that assistance before a case happens really wasn't possible in the recession times. They had it after you were in foreclosure. There was federal programs to do it, so there's been programs available beforehand. So it is definitely a factor. But on the rental assistance side, Karina mentioned we all feared a tsunami when this was starting and the pandemic started, and that had a lot to do with what we were trying to think about as we were planning the program in the beginning. And that didn't happen, and that's something everybody here should take some pride in. The rental assistance program in the county was one of the best in terms of getting rental assistance out quickly in the country, and I think was recognized for that nationally. The CLAAHD program played a part in that, but rental assistance was a huge reason why we never saw those filings, that tsunami come as was feared. And so I think you all can be proud of that at the county for the role you played in that.
We have another question.
Can someone speak to the relationship with the sheriff's department and when they are engaged? Is it just at eviction?
Bob? Karina?
I can take it. So you're asking when somebody's actually got an eviction order and it's with the sheriff?
No, to my understanding, when someone is evicted in Cook County, that the sheriff's department has a role in that?
Oh, yes.
And Bob, maybe if you could clarify the difference between filings and executions, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so that's what we're trying to avoid whenever we can, but it's not possible in every case. So if an eviction order is entered, it will give a date that somebody is supposed to leave the premises. And if they don't, the landlord places it with the sheriff, who is then responsible for enforcing the eviction. And those numbers have dropped from pre-pandemic levels. In the first year of the program, more than 3,000 less people were evicted by the sheriff. It has come back up a bit since then, but the sheriff does have a social services unit that they work with to help people as much as they can in that situation, but it is a traumatic experience for everybody involved. It's not good for the landlord either, and not for the community, and so that is what we're looking to avoid whenever we can. It's just not always possible, but I know they do the best they can. Karina, did you want to add?
Just for everyone, so enforced evictions is a different statistic that we do work with the sheriffs on, and the sheriff is involved in CLAAHD, and we meet with them regularly, and they provide those statistics. So if you read any articles about evictions in like the papers or anything like that, pay attention to if they're talking about new filings, pending cases, or enforced evictions. So if they're talking about enforced evictions, those are numbers coming from the sheriff's office. That's the number of cases where they've actually had to go out to the property to actually remove somebody. If they're talking about eviction filings, they're talking about the new cases that are initiated in the court. And those numbers, ideally, the number of enforced evictions is going to be substantially lower than the number of eviction cases filed. And that's where kind of CLAAHD comes into place, because it allows for dismissal of a lot of those cases as well. So just to clarify those a little bit.
If I could just add one quick thing about those that have to be enforced, because we're seeing these tenants and we sometimes know which ones will get evicted. We also know we can contact the sheriff's office in their social service department, or let the tenants know they can contact the sheriff's office in their social services department to let the sheriff know there's someone in this household that is bedridden. There's someone here that's really vulnerable that might need additional services. So it's still traumatic, but there can be a plan put in place for those people that have to be actually evicted so they can get additional resources. And we're in a unique space to be able to do that.
All right. I think that's all the time we have. Thank you so much to our panelists for your time and your answers to your questions. Just as a last little plug, if you have ideas for different topics that we could use for this type of spotlight, email Rudy or Lauren, or just talk to them on the side. Raise your hand, Rudy, and talk to them, and they're taking your ideas in. Thanks again, y'all.